Hello. Hello. Hold on one moment. We're going to get a microphone fixed. Turn off the microphone if you're obviously. Are we good there? I'm checking. Testing. 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 We got it. Sorry about that technology.
Just glad it was you and not me.
So welcome to our October Care Partner Training, Solo Aging and Building a Support Team. Our mission here at Insight is to provide specialized care, education, and support for individuals in all stages of memory and cognitive impairment and their partners at the in the community. Our vision, a community where those living with memory or cognitive impairment and their care partners can achieve the highest quality of life. Our speaker today is Heather Surrey, founder and CEO of Pathways in Aging. She's a registered nurse with more than 25 years of experience in community-based nursing. Her work experience in skilled nursing facilities, home health, home care, outpatient settings, and hospice have prepared her for helping families to navigate these options and resources for aging well and managing healthcare crisis. She founded Pathways in Aging in 2017. Just a couple housekeeping things. We are recording this so you can watch it later. She will share the PowerPoint in a PDF to me later, and we will also send that out to you guys in an email following. I do want to thank AARP for sponsoring, and we'll be sending a survey link in that email as well for you guys to fill out. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing and let Heather share her PowerPoint with us and let her get started. Thank you for coming, Heather, and we're very happy to have you.
Thank you for having me. See if I can get screen share there. Good.
Yes, and please go ahead if you have any questions, anyone that's online, there's quite a crowd of you, please put in the Q&A box. And Heather said that we can ask questions throughout, so we'll, raise our hands and ask her the questions for you. So without further ado.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And hello, everyone who's here at the Insight Education Center today and folks that have joined us online. Insight asked me to come in today and talk about solo aging and building a support team for solo agers. So that's what we are going to do. And like Melissa said, please feel free to interrupt me, ask your question. Heather will grab those ones that might be coming in online. So first thing is, Melissa introduced me. I think she told you most of what you need to know, but kind of what gives me the authority to speak on this topic today. I am a nurse for more than 25 years. I've always worked in the community. I've always loved working with older adults and work with older adults across multiple different settings. I'm also a certified care manager, which means I have passed a national credentialing exam, certifying me in the profession of care management. And I own a group practice here in Northern Virginia, and we also serve the greater Seattle area, which is where I am originally from. So before we get started into these things that we can do to plan for building a care team for solo agers, I wanted to talk a little bit about what a solo ager is. And because this is a term we're hearing a lot in the media, I'm sure you're reading about it, they're talking about it on news programs and on talk shows. And as I thought about it, and if any of you know Steve Gurney over at Positive Aging, he talks about this a lot, that solo agers really have the potential, like most of us have the potential to be solo agers. So it could be someone who was never married, or maybe married at one point and divorced or widowed, or just currently without a partner. Solo agers might have no children. They might have children, but don't have the relationship or the support needed for aging and for decision making as people age. Maybe because of estrangement in relationship, maybe because of distance. I work with a lot of families who might have kids who work overseas. We live in a global economy, right? Everybody is spread out everywhere. And especially here in the Northern Virginia, DC metro area, we have a lot of transient folks, a lot of folks who worked for the federal government landed here, and maybe family is spread out. I work with families who have children, but those children might have special needs themselves. They might have mental illness. They might have intellectual or developmental disabilities that mean that they can't support their parents as they age. So I would argue that many of us, many more than I originally thought when I first pondered this concept of solo aging, could potentially be solo agers. So when getting this presentation together, and this is the first presentation I have done specifically on solo agers, but I've done a lot of different talks in the community and really pulled from a lot of those as I was thinking about this. And I like to put things into buckets when I'm trying to organize thoughts, and I feel like it's easier for people to learn new things if you can put them into categories. So I talk about buckets. And for building a team for solo agers, I think about three buckets: a medical bucket, a legal and financial bucket, and a social bucket. So I have a question for the people who are in the room or the people who are online. I'm wondering what you think, or maybe what you think I think, is the most important bucket. If we're looking at those three buckets, the medical, the social, the legal, and financial buckets, what do you think is the most important one for solo agers to consider? Anything come to mind?
You
Yeah.
all of them are important. I don't think you can extrapolate anyone and say that's more important than the other.
Okay.
I'm thinking social is probably more important, but for me, legal and financial, because once I get that taken care of, I can relax and be social.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to argue that the social is the most important bucket. And this is why. You know, when we talk about the medical and the financial pieces, there's a lot of people out there you can hire to do that stuff for you, right? To take care of you. You hire your doctors, you hire caregivers, you might pay to live in a senior living community. You might pay an attorney to build your legal paperwork and your estate planning. But the truth is, it is really, really difficult, and I would argue in some cases impossible, to hire out everything that we need as we age, right? We're social beings. We are meant to be parts of community. And I think that our culture and our society, especially after COVID, we've become a lot more isolated. We're a lot less social, and it's a little trickier here. I think again in the DC metro area. I'll use the example of I work with a lot of retired foreign service families. There's a grant program for care management for retired foreign service officers, and those folks served overseas for their entire careers. But they weren't building relationships in faith communities, and they weren't going to the block parties, and they were out doing other things. So when they are aging, there are some really special challenges because they're not well connected. And as I've seen this, I've made some changes in my own life and my own behavior around doing some very intentional relationship building, because we're going to need our people when you're home and you're recovering from whatever ortho emergency happened. You want your neighbor to pick the celery out of your chicken soup. Like, someone's got to know you well enough to do those little things. You don't want to hire someone to pick the celery out of your soup. We all need our people. And I think for some people, it can be hard to figure out, okay, how do I do that? Especially maybe I'm an introvert. Maybe I've lived in the same neighborhood for 10 years and I've never talked to my neighbors before. Like, how do you even get started? And there's not a right answer for everyone. But again, as a small business owner, I kind of relate it to networking. If you've ever done any professional networking, right? You go and you kind of find your people, or if you belong to a faith community or you belong to a volunteer organization. I think that, for those of us who can, because our mobility might still be pretty good or our cognition might still be pretty good, that we really need to open ourselves to those greater relationships. And for solo agers, for intergenerational relationships, right? Because your bestie, who's the same age as you, once you're both 90, you might not you might not be able to help each other, quite the way you would with some of the younger crowds. So, we're seeing the villages. Are everyone familiar with the Village Network? Village to
Could you
Village
talk
Network?
about that a little bit? Because I know that term a lot.
Yeah, and I put the URL in here, the
Got it.
b2bnetwork.org. So that's their association. I just attended their conference a couple of weeks ago. And these are organizations, and really, we talked during the conference about how it's really more international at this point, but they're very intentional and they're multi-generational and they're volunteer led with the goal of helping people age in place. So, they're organized, they're working on helping people get to medical appointments. They're working on building relationships with services. So if you've got a home care company and, we say, okay, we got 10 people in this neighborhood that are going to need home care, do a little price negotiation, like how can we advocate to help people age in place? But this is a very community oriented structure, and we have these villages locally. Ruston, Arlington, Fairfax, Alexandria all have villages, and there are many across the country. Yes.
So the Fairfax one is only for city residents, am I correct?
I don't know all of the villages, all of their specific groups, but if you go to the b2bnetwork.org, you can do a search and then you can learn more about the different villages. Or maybe when you get with your neighbors and see, I'm a firm believer in we're not going to be able to hire all the help that we need. We have to do a better job of taking care of each other. And everybody's going to need something. Those younger folks in the neighborhood, you might need a ride to the doctor, but they need to know how to cook something or write a postcard, for goodness sakes. I've got adult kids, they don't know how to write postcards. So there's skills that we can share. And so that social aspect is really important. I think support groups can be a great place to network and find people who also have problems that they're trying to solve, and can be when I'm working with families as a care manager and they're looking for a caregiver who can just come and just help with the shower, right? That's really hard to find with agencies. Agencies are looking at, blocks. There's some that will just come for an hour, but most agencies want to come in a 4-hour block. There's a lot of people that don't need or can't afford 4 hours of home care. So I always tell people, join a support group because everybody's in the same boat. We're all facing a lot of the same challenges. And if you've got this great private caregiver who helps you with that, maybe she can hop over to your house afterwards, right? Like that's a lot of this word of mouth, is how we solve problems. And it's also a great way to build community. So I really would challenge folks to think about who your social network is and what can you do to just start expanding that a little bit. And it you have to get a little vulnerable. It's sometimes tricky to reach out, but I promise you, there are so many people out there who need the same thing. So it's worth it. So that's, I think, the number one thing that we need to do for solo agers. I do have something on here about a senior community. I think for some folks, the decision to move into a senior community can be a way of building a social network, whether it's with other residents, whether it's with staff. If that is an area where things aren't coming together with your aging in place plan, then, maybe making that move sooner rather than later for some people is the right decision. There's no right or wrong way to do this. It's finding the right way for you.
We do have a question about the medical.
Yes.
From Karen. Curious from an industry standpoint, how the medical/care industries are preparing for this part of the silver avalanche. What kind of options do we see happening?
So in terms of social support?
I think support for the solo agers.
Yeah. So I think people are just getting started. I mean, there's all kinds of products and services for sale like that. The industry is definitely aware that there is money to be had in the avalanche, So I see a lot of different products and services, medication reminder services or remote monitoring services. I am very interested in not just for solo agers, but how do we leverage technological solutions to reduce the need for costly in-home care? Because we do have a labor shortage in this country, and it is deeply impacting the availability of like that certified nursing assistant level of care. And COVID's made that even more apparent. So that it's supply and demand, right? It drives the prices up and it's really squeezing the middle class in terms of and Medicare is not covering that kind of care. There's this question about whether, the medical necessity. I would argue that being able to get help going to the toilet is not a luxury, but, this is the system that we have right now that's going to become very expensive. So how can we safely delay some of that need for the costly in-home care? And technology has some resources, but I don't think there are any great answers. I think we're all trying to figure it out. And talking about medical support team planning, none of this is going to be huge news for you, but I think, building relationship with your primary care provider. I think for folks who are, I don't want to put an age on it because 75 looks different for a lot of different people, but if you have chronic health conditions and you're over 70, you probably should be seeing your PCP quarterly. We want your PCP to get to know you, to know your baseline so they can recognize when you're on. And as a solo ager, again, we're trying to build in those layers of support so that we have people out in the community that know when you're off. When I have people who haven't seen their PCP in 2 years because they didn't have a problem or didn't need to, and you have an acute onset, a sudden onset of cognitive changes, maybe you're a little confused, you're disoriented, you're mixed up. If they haven't seen you in 2 years, they might look at you and look at your age and think, oh, maybe it's dementia, and not know that last week that wasn't how you were, right? So it's important to make sure that we have these touch points with our medical providers and allow our medical providers to try to get to know us. And we have to be proactive about that because they are not, right? If you don't show up, they're not calling you, the way our medical system is set up, you really have to be your own advocate. And get yourself in front of your provider. I think these next three, when we talk about code status, healthcare proxy or healthcare decision maker, and advanced care planning, these are three separate things that go together, but they're important things to be thinking about. Code status is where we talk about whether someone wants CPR or doesn't want CPR. Some people think that because they did an advanced medical directive with their attorney, that they are a DNR. And that is not the case. If EMTs come to your house, they're not going to dig through your file cabinet, pull out your AMD, read all 16 pages of it, and find the place where it says DNR. They legally cannot do that. There's only a couple of forms they can recognize as a DNR. So, if someone has very strong feelings about they do not want CPR, you have to have the right documentation in the home. That's not going to be a need for everyone today. It may be something you have feelings about in the future. So, or for someone that you're caring for who thinks they have documentation that they don't actually have. Your healthcare proxy and decision maker, this is really important for Solo Agers. I mean, I think it's important for everybody, because I think for folks who are married or they have adult children, they just kind of, by default, we think it's going to be our spouse. Sometimes our spouse is not the right person to be making decisions for us. If your spouse is going to be too emotional and not be able to act on your documented wishes or your expressed wishes, then maybe they're not the right person for the job. So it's important when you're thinking about who your healthcare proxy is going to be and who you nominate for that job. One, that you tell them and they agree. That I run into a lot where, they have their attorney write it in, but that person didn't know that they were signed up for the job. So you want to talk about your wishes, your preferences, your values with that person and make sure that they're on board and they feel prepared to support you in those. But you also have to document it. You have to make sure that person has the paperwork. Now, some of the Solo Agers I work with feel like, I don't know who that person's going to be. If I'm not married, if I don't have adult children, who is that person going to be? Well, I will take you back to, you need to meet some more people. That's one thing. You need to find, your tribe. It's usually, not all the time, but often better if the person who is going to be your healthcare proxy is not going to be 90 when you're 90. That might be a difficult job for them to act out on. But there are also some other companies that provide this service. If you work with your attorney may know of them. Some care management practices do. Some of us do it kind of selectively because it's a huge responsibility, right? We don't want to sign everybody up to be your healthcare proxy and then do a really terrible job at it, right? It's a sacred thing. When we agree to be somebody's healthcare proxy, like I, the person, agree to that, not me, the company, which means, I'm your healthcare proxy until the end. And that's not a responsibility that we take lightly. But there are companies that have organizational structures for this. In this area, Paladin in Arlington, they also do care management, they do daily money management, they have a variety of things. But there are a handful of companies where you can have someone professionally do that. Sometimes attorneys will do it, particularly if you've got a long-term relationship. But all of those services cost money. So I'm an advocate for find your person, so that, somebody who knows you and is going to be able to be your advocate. But it's important that that's written down. Yes.
How do you feel about children being healthcare proxy roles? Is it too much for many children, clarifying adult children?
Yeah, I think adult children, it's a great job for an adult child if, if they can manage it. Your kid, and if your kid can handle that responsibility. But the vast majority of the folks that we work with who have children have a child fulfilling that role. I will say, and I'll get down to this a little bit, working with an aging life care professional makes it easier, so working with someone like us where we have a lot of kids who are healthcare proxies and they're in the workforce and they've got kids and they're sandwich generation, we can help distill the information, distill the options. It's the role of an aging life care professional to give folks really high quality information with which to make educated decisions. So sometimes having a partnership can make that easier. But I would say yes, if it's appropriate for your child. Your advanced care planning, anybody heard of the PULSE form? Portable medical orders for end of life. PULSE stands for Physician's Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. So this takes that DNR paperwork and adds a lot more information. This is appropriate for someone who has, chronic health conditions. When I did my PULSE training years ago with Dr. Kestenbaum, he said, really somebody who's in the last year or two of life, we think, in the crystal ball. But this is a document that is wonderful because not only can you address the code status in it, it talks about, breathing support. Like, do you want to be intubated? Are you saying, no, I don't want to be intubated, but maybe having a non-invasive breathing support, like a BiPAP might be okay. Or no, I don't want any of that. I just want to be comfortable. It addresses tube feeding. It allows you to go into more detail. And the document itself is really valuable because what it means, it empowers you to communicate your wishes so that when you aren't able to communicate what you do and want, then the doctors have something to work with. Your healthcare proxy can then carry out your wishes instead of making a decision for you. And that going back to, is this too stressful for adult kids? One way you can make it a lot less stressful for adult kids is to get really clear on what you do and don't want, because it is much easier to carry out someone's wishes than it is to make decisions for someone. So we've got really great tools available to document all of those things. And these are things that really go above and beyond your advanced medical directive that you would do when you do just regular estate planning, because that is, tongue in cheek, I call it the pull the plug clause, right? When you're in the hospital and, if you are, two doctors have deemed that you're not going to recover, then do they continue life support or not? I'm not saying that's not an important document to have. It is, but it's very specific for, kind of a specific scenario. And there's so many other things medically, all of these other decision points medically that tend to come up with older adults. So, the more that we have documented and the more that you've discussed, that conversation is super valuable, the better. Your medical portals, I think now, like as years go on, most people now have their My Charts and that kind of stuff set up. But if you don't, you definitely want it. It can be a lifesaver if somebody needs to understand what's happening with you if you're in a hospital. For us as care managers, we can get much more out of a medical portal than we can sitting at someone's bedside, charging them for the hour to hold their hand, right? We don't know any more than they do. Nobody ever comes to tell you anything in the hospital. They're coming in and out. The medical portals are one of my favorite things about modern medicine. And you want your person to know how to access your medical portal so they can know what's happening and know how to advocate for you.
You say that like there is only one. It seems like anytime you go to a specialist, they have their own. Is there anything that connects them, or do you think someday they will all be connected?
There's controversy about that. As a nurse, I wish there was, because of course my priority is that medical knowledge. But the other side of the controversy is information privacy. Yeah. If there's one source, that's one thing to hack, and then everything is there. And what does that do to our insurance system when everybody knows all of your medical stuff and costs of insurance, and so that privacy piece is another concern. But right now there is no one kind of universal system. Epic is a system that medical professionals have access to, or often it's not, it isn't specific to one hospital system. So they might be able, your doctors might be able to pull information out of that, but it isn't available to those of us on the outside. I would say, just like, hopefully everybody's got their password, somewhere recorded, because, your people are going to need to access financial accounts and that kind of stuff too. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So having your, how to access your medical portals, what they are, your usernames and passwords, having some way to organize that. And there's lots of, there's analog stuff if you like to write things down. Memory Bank, BANC, makes a great book where you can write all kinds of stuff down for your people, where there's lots of digital password minders too. But you want it to be, set up in a way that would be accessible to your person. Our practice really specializes in working with people with dementia and with Parkinson's disease. So if you have a person with Parkinson's disease, this IPMDC hospital letter, super important. Even if you're not an INOVA patient, if somebody from California is online and sees this, you can still use this letter. You can still download it. And with Parkinson's disease, there are several medications that are contraindicated for Parkinson's. They make Parkinson's symptoms much worse and can cause devastating side effects to people with Parkinson's disease. But for some reason that I don't fully understand, it's not something I was taught in nursing school. It's not something that that we see in practice in the hospital. We see these medications given all the time. And one of the ones that is the most damaging and also very common in hospitals is Haldol. So, for somebody who is very agitated, or they're hallucinating, or they're kind of delusional, disoriented, it's not uncommon for a hospital to have standing orders to give someone a shot of Haldol or give it IV. And yes, it chills people out right fast, but we see people with Parkinson's have hallucinations, right? That's part of the disease process. You have somebody who has Parkinson's and maybe they also have a urinary tract infection or a pneumonia, some infection process that is making the confusion worse. We see this in older adults all the time. So if they go into an emergency room and somebody gives them Haldol, it can be very devastating to that person. So, it's really important. This letter developed by the INOVA team lists out the medications that are contraindicated for people with Parkinson's, so you can hand it to your nurse when you go in. And it's an additional layer of protection, a way you can advocate for yourself or somebody can advocate for you. And then aging life care professionals, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But, the reason I kind of added that into the medical piece is because there's only so much you can plan for now, right? So, if you're a solo ager, you're interested in this topic, but maybe you're not going to need services, home care services, for 3, 5, 10 more years. The home care companies that we think are doing a great job today, it may not even be around 5 years from now. We're seeing a lot of consolidation in the industry, people selling, people buying, companies going out of business, larger corporations coming in and buying businesses. And one of the benefits of working with a care manager is that we are out in the community working with these companies. We're in the senior living communities. We know who's good at what and what the strengths and the weaknesses are of the different companies. And so when people say, well, we think maybe in 5 years we want to move into assisted living, what are the good ones? And I say, call me when you're in, you're out, because it may not be the same then. So we kind of have our finger on the pulse of what's available in the community. For doctors too. I mean, somebody asked me who to go for, if you are having cognitive changes or you have a diagnosis of dementia, you want to understand your disease and your treatment options. They asked me that question 5 years ago. We didn't have Dr. Polderai 5 years ago, right? So Jennifer Polderai, and I know a cognitive behavioral neurologist who is, just a superstar in our area. She's fantastic. So things change, right? New resources come, and that's something that care managers are really great at. What's new, what's available, what's going to bring the most value to your specific situation. So moving on to the legal, I put kind of legal and financial into the same bucket because there's a lot of intersections between the two. Estate planning is important. A lot of my clients will kind of brush over the POA part and say, well, I have my will, and I'm like, that you have your will is great. But nobody cares about your will until after you're gone. Like, I'm really concerned about what's happening when you're still here. So this estate planning piece talks about trusts, wills, your advanced medical directive, and your POAs. All of them are really important. Daily money managers. Are you familiar with daily money managers? So these are a great tool for solo agers. Daily money managers can act as fiduciaries. They can even, some of them, act as financial POAs. So, that's a service. It's a paid service, and I put the URL for their professional association there. So for things like care managers and daily money managers, I think it's best to look at the professional association because they have more rigorous standards for membership. So there's a better chance you're going to get somebody qualified. But they can do everything from getting your bills set up on auto pay, monitoring accounts for fraud. That's a big one because we see so many people becoming vulnerable to that and not realizing until there's nothing anybody can do. So they can keep an eye on that type of thing. And then if and when it became necessary, serve as your financial POA. So that's a great resource. If you are lucky enough to have a long-term care insurance policy, they do not write them like they used to, but if you have one of those old ones, dust it off. For goodness sakes, you paid so much for that policy. You want to milk it for all it's worth. So you want to get it out, you want to read it, make sure you understand it. And, also, and maybe you're working with a care manager, or maybe you've got, somebody, your healthcare proxy, your financial POA. I would advocate you get them a copy too, because by the time you need it, that kind of process of filing a claim can be so involved. It's really difficult to do on your own. And I think some of that's by design, because if it's too hard, you don't follow through and then they don't have to pay.
Heather, could you tell everyone the best time to implement it? Because I find some people wait too long and then don't get to use up their whole policy.
Yes. So there are, for the vast majority of the policies that are written, there are two ways to trigger it. Either you need hands-on assistance with 2 or more activities of daily living. which might mean transferring. It might mean you need someone, assistant with walking, with getting to the bathroom. Meal preparation, they don't care whether you can make a sandwich yourself. They care whether you can put it in your mouth. So that's a hard one. Most people can't use that one. But putting compression stockings on, that counts. Getting in and out of the shower, those are usually like the two where I can get people on the fastest. So fastening clothing, if your range of motion is, you have trouble getting a jacket on. So, if you need help with two or more things, that will make you eligible. The other pathway to eligibility is if your cognition is impaired to the degree where you need significant supervision, which can be subjective. So, making sure this is why we see the doctor every quarter. So there's lots of documentation about changes, about, when we get to that point where we meet that significant supervision criteria. And the way we prove that is with lots of documentation. So those are the two ways you can trigger a policy. Many of them have 30, 60, 90, some of them even 120-day deductibles, essentially, where you have to pay out of pocket for care for a certain number of days before you start getting your benefit. Most policies reimburse, so you pay for the care and they reimburse. So there's a lot of barriers to getting it started, but we care managers, we're like dogs on a bone with this kind of stuff. We want to get you your money. So we know kind of how to jump through the hoops, but I think it helps if you really understand your policy, your person, your decision maker understands your policy, and then you try to activate it as soon as you're eligible so that you can get the full value from that. Most policies too, once it's activated, you don't pay premiums anymore. So that's another thing. You don't want to hang on to it and keep paying a premium when you're eligible to use it. Your financial advisor, very important to have a financial advisor understand your big picture. They don't always understand the care side or the cost of care side. So that's something to kind of be aware of. So when they're making projections, there's some people who their incomes are low, their assets are low. Like we know that we're going to be having discussions about Medicaid at some point, right? And then we have some people who have so much money nobody's even worried, right? I wish we were all those people. But most of us are in the middle where we really have to be thinking about, what we've got and, how to make it last and how the costs of care are going to impact what we have and how long it lasts. And so that's the part where I see some financial advisors, they don't have that medical care piece. So I did put a link in here for the Life Care Affordability Plan, and they are part of a larger investment company, a financial institution, but you don't have to be with them with their investment company in order. They almost do this plan. It's kind of a standalone product, but it looks at all of your finances, all of your assets and your income, but also brings in that care piece, and their projections can be more accurate. So that's something that I think is worth looking
We just did a presentation with our vet who does
Oh,
that
did
in
you?
August. So if you go
Yeah.
into our webinars, you can see that presentation from her and learn more about that program.
Yeah, it's a fantastic program and provides a lot of insights. Medicaid planning. So some people aren't familiar with the differences between an estate attorney and an elder law attorney because they both can do estate planning. They both can help you with your POAs and with your wills and with your advanced medical directives. But elder law attorneys often have expertise in the Medicaid planning side. And so if you're not sure, or you think that you or your loved one, the person that you're looking after, might need Medicaid, their funds might not provide for the care that they need through the end of their life. You want to meet with an elder law attorney specifically sooner rather than later, because they understand all of the different options. Particularly, I mean, I know we're talking about solo agers today, but I take care of people who were never legally divorced. They've been living separately solo, but if so for day-to-day life, they're functioning as a solo ager, but it's really important to look at that, because there are certain legal and financial things you can do earlier on that might be able to protect some of those assets, particularly if there is a spouse. And it always breaks my heart when I get a call from a family to wait because they've been paying 12 hours. Oh, I have a tickle. 12 hours of home care a day for months and months and months, and they're down to their last $30,000, and they could have set aside 130 and protected it because there's a regulation to prevent spousal impoverishment. So, there's for Medicaid and for Medicaid long-term care, it can be, thank you, Melissa, it can be very convoluted and difficult to understand, especially when you're stressed and not feeling well and, when you need it, right? So meeting with an elder law, doing that consultation with an attorney sooner rather than later.
Heather, someone asked, can you talk about the 5-year look back CMS has for Medicaid? Because a lot of people don't know about that.
Yep. So and again, I'm not an attorney. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm a nurse and care manager. So I'll tell you what I know, but it's not legal advice. But that concept of the 5-year look back means that when you are applying for Medicaid, so we have Medicaid, which is the health insurance, right? And then we have Medicaid for long-term care, which is for people who are over 65 or blind or disabled, who need help with care. They have met financial eligibility as well as medical eligibility to either have care come into the home or to go live in a nursing home, in a nursing facility. So when they are looking at the financial eligibility, they're looking at your money and where it all went in the last 5 years. They get 5 years of bank statements, and they are meticulous. They are very detailed. So, what some people try to do is they try to spend that money down really quick so they can get someone into a nursing home, or they can get care in the home because it's getting really hard, right? And so they just are trying to make that process go faster. So maybe they buy a car for this grandchild, and they set up a separate account and move a bunch of money out to try to make it look like they meet the eligibility. But they go back and they look at where all of your money went in the last 5 years, and if it wasn't spent on that individual's needs and care, it can delay your eligibility for coming on. Now, I will say that the elder law attorneys kind of have some ways that they, because there's essentially a delay in eligibility and a penalty involved. There's ways they do the math and make that work for people, but you don't want to do that on your own. You really want to work with somebody who knows what they're doing. Yeah. Funeral planning is another thing that I wish more people talked about, and I wish more of us did it. One, when we talk about funeral planning, if we think that Medicaid is going to be part of this future conversation, spending your money on funeral planning and funeral costs in advance is part of an acceptable spend down. So that's one thing that you can do. But I also feel like, especially for our solo agers, the same reason why we're talking today about all of this documentation, the things that you can do to express and document your wishes in advance. What you do and do not want after death, those are hard decisions for somebody to make for you. And you may have some pretty specific feelings about what you do and don't want. And so making those decisions, in advance. And I know there's also, and this is things I actually learned recently, that depending on the county, you have to designate who is responsible for the disposition of your remains. Otherwise, they have to track down your next of kin, even if it's a third cousin in Kansas.
Wow.
And that can delay things happening. So, talking with a funeral planner, with a funeral home in advance to make sure that you have everything documented well. If there are things that you want and that you don't want, or things that you want to prepay, those are all things that empower us so that we're making our own decisions. And I'll say that it's interesting. We're seeing a change in the funeral industry, where we're seeing more funeral homes kind of come up and push back against some of what I will call predatory sales practices in that industry, the kind of some of the upselling we see, which, has been one of the reasons I probably haven't done as much of that with my clients, because it's, I feel like a bulldog when I go in
You haven't
there.
suggested they go to Costco and buy their casket? You can totally do that.
Well, and what I learned also recently, my team, we actually took a deep dive into advanced care planning and funeral planning just last week. We did an all-day training on it. I think that there are either 2 or 3 casket manufacturers in the country. So if you go to the upscale place and they're charging you 3 times as much, it's the same thing as the guy down the street has. There's only so many people who make it. So I think that, there's a lot people don't know about that industry, but we're seeing, I actually talked to a company recently that was started in the last 5 years by 2 millennial generation sisters, who are like, enough of this. And they're doing things really differently. So I think we have more options.
Someone just shared on here, there's actually, in some states, they allow you to rent caskets.
Yep.
You can have a nice one for the service and then have the cheaper one to in turn in ground.
Yeah. Not for everyone.
Your face said what I'm
You can-
thinking.
Yeah, we have some faces in this room.
Yeah, I've always heard that you couldn't, do that, that
You
was-
can't.
Things are changing.
It's another, it depends on, but that's just the point, right? Like, all of us have different opinions about what is and isn't important to us. So, my kids can do it as cheap as they want to do it. That's not important to me to have a fancy casket. If it is, you should make sure that nobody puts you in a cheap one.
Yeah.
If it's not, and you want your money to go toward other things, that's why talking about it now, I think, really can be powerful.
So I do want to say real quick, I have a couple people bringing more details in about Medicaid. We're going to be doing a separate presentation on that. This isn't Heather's knack with all of that's why she encouraged everyone to go to an elder law lawyer that can talk to them more about this, about all the, if you can own your house and all these different things. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to bring those up in this presentation. I'm not intentionally ignoring you, but I just want us to stay on track for what this topic is. But thank you for sharing.
And maybe I don't want to be too specific, I want to appeal to everybody, but if you don't want a funeral, is there, and I know I have a place to be buried, but they won't let me pay in advance because the price could change. Would a funeral planner still be able to help with that, even if you don't want a funeral? Or where would you go to take?
I would start with the funeral planner to understand what you can fully do
Okay.
in advance.
So,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. And then, I have on here just understanding the costs of care. I met with a family just yesterday who shared with me, we're going to take care of our person at home through the end of his life. That's what we all agreed on as a family. That's what we're going to do. And then we talked about costs of care, and they're like, yeah, that's not going to be possible. So it's important. I always talk about have your plan A, but you need to know the numbers cost is not the only factor, but it is a critically important factor. And you need to have your plan B in your back pocket. And the sooner you know what options are out there, then it'll help you plan, because things are so broad, right? You can't plan for everything, but you can narrow it a little bit if you're familiar with those.
Heather, we have a question from Arthur. I have a lawyer prepared estate plan already. How can I tell if the lawyer was an elder law attorney? And how do I find a professional care manager?
We're going to get to that, the care manager piece, in a second. I think you could probably call your lawyer, or you can look on the website to see, usually it'll say estate law, or it'll say estate and elder, or just elder. But call your lawyer and ask, or look on their website. Yeah, but I think it's, if you need more than just estate planning, then that's a conversation with your attorney. I sometimes see estate attorneys, there's no law that says that they can't do elder law things, because the other thing that elder law attorneys do really well is guardianships, conservatorships, that kind of thing. I see estate attorneys sometimes doing those things, not as well as the elder law attorneys, right? So it's that's why it's important for you to be your own advocate, find out who's good at what, and make sure the attorney you're working with is really prepared for the service that you need.
So Heather, the other thing we need on that list of things to have for your caregivers, and y'all are going to think I'm crazy, have your music playlist. Because I want to know your 40 top songs, because if I'm taking care of you, I may play Metallica, and that may not be your piece of music. So have your list of music, because music's the last thing to go, and we can comfort you as you're aging.
Well, that's why you expand your social network and you have your friends, because they'll pick the celery out of your chicken soup too.
Yes.
Important things.
Important, like death doula.
Yes, death doulas are fantastic, and we're seeing many more people enter that field. So aging life care professionals, we used to be called geriatric care managers. That is, that term has gone away. We're aging life care professionals now, and that's because I have people I work with who had strokes in their 50s, and they do not consider themselves geriatric. Quite frankly, I have people well into their 70s who do not consider themselves geriatric. So it's kind of a loaded term, and it really is not as inclusive as the work we do. So aging life care professionals are what we are. And I think where we can really bring value, we do a lot of things. But when I was thinking about, okay, how do I condense this through the lens of solo aging? Considerations for aging in place versus going into a senior living community. People have a lot of preconceived notions, often based on what their parents or grandparents' experiences were, without knowing the cost implications, of any of it. So I think that's an area where we all do a lot of work, is helping people understand the options, the pros and the cons. What are the questions you should be asking? What should you be thinking about as you're, exploring your options there? Building your team over time. We talked about this a few minutes ago with, the neurologists that I'm recommending today are different than the ones I was recommending 5 years ago. Things change. And so we really know we're up on the latest of who's the best at what. I always use home care as an example. If you want to know who's got the absolute cheapest prices, I can tell you. If you want to know who can do a 1-hour shift, I can tell you. If you want someone who's got a super high touch customer service experience and you're going to have direct interaction with the owner, I can tell you. So, there's lots of companies out there, and they're all great at something. But, an aging life care manager is going to drill down what is important to you, and then match you with a short list of options that are crafted for you. And I think it's a little bit further down on the list here, but I talked about our code of ethics, because it goes with this. Aging life care professionals, we are prohibited from taking any kind of financial compensation from anyone we refer you to. We can't have financial contracts with anyone but our clients, which means if I say, hey, use ABC Home Care, I can't take a kickback from them. Or if, I recommend a senior living community, that's gonna be based on my assessment, on my recommendations after talking with you, on my experience in that building, not because they're gonna compensate me the equivalent of the first month's rent. So there are business models out there that are different. And those business models are right for some people in certain circumstances. But I think that it's important to know, and why this logo, Aging Life Care logo, is important. That the people who are members of this association don't take money from anybody, any of the resources in the community. We can help you make the most of your insurance, your health insurance, your Medicare, help you understand what the options are, your long-term care insurance. All of that can be confusing. We know how it works, how the Medicaid pieces work, all of it. Of course, education, we hear this a lot when people go in, and this is something, Insight's a fantastic resource for this too, for dementia. I'm using the dementia example, but it could be anything. You go in and you get your diagnosis. We've heard this from so many families. They're like, okay, yeah, we think you have Alzheimer's. We think you have, Lewy body dementia. Here's a prescription. Have a nice day. Like, what do you do next? There's this whole world of questions and resources that are needed. And so that's something we're great at, whether it's disease education or the coaching piece, the support piece, how you navigate life with that diagnosis or that concern. We advocate for our people in senior living communities, in the hospital, with their doctor. We work with a lot of Solo Agers, and we're kind of their person. We might not be the healthcare proxy, or sometimes care managers are, but we're going to fight for you like that person would. And so I think that knowing someone has gotten to know you, knows what's important to you, and make sure that your voice is heard and your best interests are looked after, is something that is important to Solo Agers.
They're a great tool to prevent ageism too. Today's National Ageism Day.
Oh, okay.
And so care managers, like Aging Life Care professionals, are very good about making sure you don't get they have this diagnosis, they're 89, it doesn't matter. And that's when we get a little fired up and we say that it has nothing to do with it. This person deserves all the care, and this is what we want. And so they're really good at being that voice for you, which I think is important.
Or when we go to the doctor with people and they talk to us and not our client, and we're like, hello, eyes over here.
Yep.
This person has questions, we're just here to make sure you answer them all.
Yeah.
So yeah, that advocacy piece is really core to what we do. And then down here, to answer the question that was asked, the aginglifecare.org is our professional association website, and you can do a zip code search and find an Aging Life Care manager anywhere in the US, and we have some in Canada as well. And you can also reach out to local care managers. Many of us here in the Mid-Atlantic chapter are involved with the association at different national levels. And so we know people. I know who's good in North Carolina, and who's good in LA, and who's good in Philadelphia. And, so we're always happy to connect you with a colleague who we think are going to be a good fit for you. Question.
Please feel free to put any questions in the Q&A to ask her. I think they did a good job of asking during the presentation. Anyone in the room have any questions for that may have popped up?
I asked mine.
All right, here's one. It's not related to the topic. I will answer this one.
Okay.
Privately.
Got it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
To hire a care manager, what is the price range that? I don't think of it exact, depending on what the service is, but just to even consider.
Yeah, so it varies across the country. I would say probably looking at 120, 130 per hour up to, I met someone in LA recently that was charging 300 an hour. But I think it's important to, couple of comments on, and I'm glad you asked this question because this is an important question. That, one, we're working as consultants primarily. We can take people to medical appointments. We can do things that spend blocks of hours, and some of our clients do need that from us, but not everybody does. And so I think that, I know for my practice and a lot of my colleagues' practices, we're really looking at how do we make care management more accessible to a wider range of budgets. So I think, it's, I equate it to like picking out a therapist. Like you got to call a few and find out what their billing structure are. Some people want a retainer, some people do not. Some people have programs where they might check in with you 3 times a year or twice a year if you don't have immediate needs. Different companies kind of have different ways, but we all, our core service is working on an hourly rate.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Where can you list for care in hospital options if you want or don't need feeding tube, breathing bypass, that kind of stuff?
Where can you?
I'm guessing they mean like a living will.
Yeah.
Like where do you put that so people know about it?
Yeah. So again, I would recommend, like, you might not need a feeding tube today, but we're all one dislodged blood clot away from needing a feeding tube. That this is, where we see somebody have a stroke and it might temporarily impair your swallow. And that's why this level of decision making is important. Do you want, under no circumstances, do you say, I do not want a feeding tube? Or do you want a feeding tube for a trial period to see if with rehab you can get your swallow back? That is possible for some people. Or do you feel strongly you do want a feeding tube? I'll tell you, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, if you have a feeding tube, you cannot be cared for in assisted living. And licensed home care agencies, CNAs, cannot take care of your feeding tube at home. So that means that either you hire someone privately as an independent contractor, or you're living in a nursing home. The doctors aren't presenting those options to people, and the doctors tend to be, most of them, pretty conservative. They often think there's some social worker who's going to explain all of those things, the mythical social worker that explains it all, and they don't. So these are important things to really examine and communicate your own wishes, preferences, values in advance. Now, most hospital systems now and doctors' offices are asking for those advanced medical directives. So if that's all you have, that's better than nothing. That will give the doctors some information about what you do and don't want. And a lot of doctors' offices have those on file. Hospitals now will want those on file. They can pull them up in your chart pretty quickly. But that post form, and that's signed by your doctor, it is a physician's order. So they have it on file. We get those on file with the hospitals too. So if you end up in an emergency room, they can pull it up and they can see what you do and don't want.
How difficult is it to amend those? Like if you change your mind
If you change so I would say, if you are your own decision maker, you can amend it as often as you want. You make a new one.
just go back
You make a new one, and then you need to make sure that all,
and make sure the hospital and everything
has your updated one.
How do you work in a situation where the adult children are not estranged but living very far away? And they may be most familiar with their parents' long-term wishes, but you are the person with the boots on the ground.
Yeah. That we do a lot of that, and that's what we are. We kind of joke to say we're like the rented daughter. Though I can tell you, I have two men on my team. We're trying to diversify the profession of peer management, so I can't get away with that rented daughter joke for much longer. But yes, so we work with each family individually. So how much or how little we do is really defined by the family and what they want. And sometimes that waxes and wanes. We work with families where the adult kids might travel for business. So they're like, okay, next week I'm out of country, dad's got cardiology, can you take that? But this week I'm coming in, I want to do the neurology one. I mean, we can work that granularly. But we can be the eyes on. We work, I would say for our clients, probably half of them are at home and half of them are in senior living communities, because we're in there making sure that things are going as they're supposed to. And if something isn't, then we're meeting with the staff and getting resolution. But it's hard for kids to do that if they live far away and they're only able to visit a few times a year.
The other one we have is mentioning of wallet cards, having advanced records online, like the file life that the EMTs can get off your fridge. It's a magnet.
Yeah.
Someone also mentioned the 5 wishes with the Hemlock Society. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so File of Life is great. That's a great product, and it's widely recognized by EMS. You got to keep it up to date. that we kind of run into sometimes with your medications and that kind of thing, but that can be helpful. 5 Wishes is another great document. It's legal in several states, including Virginia. And the 5 Wishes form, it's a nice little pamphlet, and it really takes you through an examination of your values and your wishes and preferences. It does allow you to elect a DNR or if you want it. And it also can serve as your healthcare proxy. You can document your healthcare proxy. And then it either needs to be signed by 2 witnesses or notarized. So that is another document. I like the 5 Wishes. I have a stack of them in my office. We use them sometimes, but I tend to prefer the post form because I feel like it's super concise. It's front and back, but all the orders are on the front page. It's on a bright fluorescent green cardstock, and it's a little bit more kind of direct, I think, for the medical side. But both of them will work.
For our people that like to live half in one state and half in another, how do both places know their medical wishes? How can we make sure that it isn't lost from their home state versus where they live for 4 months?
Yeah. So I mean, you're if you have a DNR or you have a post form, so the post, I keep saying post because Virginia used to be post. They wanted something a little different, but now they have adopted the national form, which is called the post, which is almost exactly the same thing. The post can go with you. And, if you have doctors, because we have people who winter in Florida or something like that, the doctors on both sides should have it. If you have hospital systems you go to on both sides can have it, but it travels with you. Yeah.
Okay. And then,
or you make sure your care manager has it so we can fax it wherever it needs to go.
where is the list? I was a caregiver for my husband, and although we did the living will with our attorney, I was not aware of all the other choices. Where would I find a list of options?
So, I would say some PCPs will be able to go over that with you. I don't know of one website that has a comprehensive list of options. Again, another kind of vote for care managers because we tend to kind of know what's out there. You may find, respecting choices. There's some specialty websites out there that really provide a lot of good education on end of life resources, and so sometimes they'll have a list. But different things are legal in different states, so In Virginia, there's something, a state DNR form, has a big stop sign on it and just talks about DNR. The Post is the green one that does DNR plus some other stuff. 5 Wishes is like a 5 or 6 page pamphlet that goes into more detail. So those are probably the ones we see most often. But I think, ask your doctor first, because that won't cost you anything extra, about facilitating an advanced care planning discussion. That's what we call it in the medical field, an advanced care planning discussion. They can bill Medicare for that. It's just a matter of if they have time, make time.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time. We truly appreciate it. All right. So please go to our website at insightmcc.org/events to see our next upcoming presentations that we have. We're going to talk about early onset next month with one of our neurologists. So anyone who is in the younger ages with a dementia diagnosis, it's a great conversation to have and talk and learn about all the pieces with that. We have the Robin Williams Spark movie this month, the end of the month, and it is online completely, so you can watch it in the comfort of your couch with your pajamas and some popcorn. We'll have the LBDA, the Lewy Body Association, on with us, and our panel is actually going to be a caregiver and someone with LBD, so they'll be talking. So please look up all those amazing things that we're doing. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Reminder, this has been recorded. It will be on our webinars. I'm going to get a copy of the PDF. We'll make sure we share that in a follow-up email along with the AARP survey. But thank you all for being a part of this, and Heather for being here. We truly appreciate it. And we'll see you all next month.
Yeah. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.